4,000 years before the Parthenon rose above Athens, before Rome was even a village, an island in the southern Aegean was building palaces. Crete, the largest of the Greek islands, a mountainous wilderness floating between three continents, and the birthplace of the first advanced civilization Europe had ever seen. The Minoans emerged here around 2700 BCE, constructing palace complexes that wouldn't be matched for another 2 millennia. They developed writing. They built paved roads and drainage systems. They traded with Egypt, Syria, and the distant shores of Spain. While the rest of Europe lived in primitive settlements, Crete was an empire. But this island holds more than ancient ruins. Here, mountains rise nearly 2.5 kilometers straight from the sea. Gorges split the earth so deep that sunlight barely reaches their floors. Beaches glow pink at sunset, and fortress islands guard secrets that Europe tried to forget. Crete is where Zeus, king of the gods, was born and hidden in a sacred cave, where the Minotaur stalked his labyrinth beneath a palace of 1,000 rooms, where Venetian architects built harbors so beautiful that they still take your breath away 5 centuries later. But beyond the myths and the monuments, something else survives here. A spirit. Cretans have resisted every empire that tried to claim them. Romans, Byzantines, Venetians, Ottomans, Germans. Each one eventually left, but the Cretans remained. Today, this island of 600,000 people maintains traditions that stretch back millennia. They dance in ways that haven't changed since ancient times. They produce wine, olive oil, and honey using methods their great-grandparents would recognize. They live longer than almost anyone in Europe. Over the next journey, we'll cross this island from ancient palaces to hidden beaches, from mountain villages frozen in time to shores where the Aegean meets the Libyan Sea. This is Crete, a Greek world in one island, and it begins with a labyrinth that swallowed a monster. "5 kilometers south of modern Heraklion, buried beneath olive groves and wildflowers, lay a secret that would rewrite European history. In 1900, British archaeologist Arthur Evans began excavating a low hill called Kafala. What he uncovered over the next 3 decades astonished the world. Knossos, a palace complex covering over 20,000 square meters, more than 1,300 rooms connected by corridors, staircases, and light wells, throne rooms, religious sanctuaries, workshops, and storage magazines, the administrative heart of an empire that had been completely forgotten. The Minoans left no readable records of their own history. Their script, called Linear A, remains undeciphered to this day. Everything archaeologists know comes from the physical evidence, and that evidence reveals a civilization remarkably sophisticated. The palace had running water. Clay pipes carried fresh water in and wastewater out. The Minoans engineered Europe's first flush toilets 4,000 years ago. They built drainage systems that still impress modern engineers. They painted their walls with vibrant frescoes, dolphins swimming through blue seas, athletes leaping over charging bulls, women in elaborate dresses with dark curls and proud expressions. These images suggest a society where art and beauty held deep importance, where women held prominent roles, where ritual and celebration mattered as much as commerce. And then there's the architecture itself. Rooms opening onto rooms, corridors turning back on themselves, staircases ascending and descending through multiple levels. To visitors from simpler cultures, it must have seemed impossible to navigate, a place where you could enter and never find your way out. A labyrinth. Researchers now believe this is where the myth was born, the story of King Minos, the half-bull minotaur imprisoned beneath the palace, the hero Theseus navigating endless passages with only a thread to guide him home. The Minoans themselves vanished around 1450 BCE, volcanic eruption. Invasion, earthquake. Scholars still debate the cause. Knossos guards the memory of Europe's first great civilization, but 15 minutes north, a city built by conquerors holds 400 years of different memories entirely. The capital of Crete doesn't reveal its beauty immediately. Heraklion is loud, chaotic, a working city of 175,000 people who seem perpetually in motion. Traffic clogs narrow streets, horns echo off concrete apartment blocks, but look closer. Massive Venetian walls still encircle the old town, their fortifications so formidable that Ottoman forces besieged the city for 21 years before it finally fell in 1669. It remains one of the longest sieges in history. Some historians estimate 100,000 people died before the walls were breached. The Venetians called this city Candia, and they built it to last. The fortress of Culus guards the harbor entrance, a lion of St. Mark still carved into its stone face. Fishing boats bob in waters, where Venetian galleys once loaded spices, silk, and wine bound for the markets of Venice. Walk into the old town, and centuries collapse into each other. Ottoman fountains stand beside Venetian loggias, Byzantine churches hide behind neo-classical facades, a mosque that became a cinema, that became an exhibition hall. History here doesn't form neat layers, it tangles. The Heraklion Archaeological Museum houses treasures that belong among the greatest collections on Earth. The Festus disc, a clay tablet stamped with symbols no one has ever decoded. Gold jewelry so delicate, it seems impossible that Bronze Age hands crafted it. The snake goddess, arms raised, serpents coiling around her body, staring across 4,000 years with eyes that still unsettle visitors. This is the museum where the Minoan world comes alive, where frescoes removed from Knossos glow in their original colors, where you understand that this civilization wasn't primitive at all. Heraklion's central market still operates the way it has for generations. Vendors sell mountain herbs, local cheeses and bottles of raki that could fuel a small engine. Old men argue about politics in Caphanea unchanged since the 1950s. The city won't charm you with prettiness. It earns respect through persistence. Heraklion survived sieges and earthquakes and bombardment, but the Venetians built two harbor towns further west that war somehow spared, where the Renaissance still lives and breathes along the waterfront. The Venetian Republic ruled Crete for over 4 centuries, and nowhere did they build more beautifully than along the northern coast, in two harbor towns that seem to have stopped their clocks around 1600. Chania. The old Venetian harbor curves in a perfect arc, its breakwater protecting fishing boats and wooden caiques from the open sea. A lighthouse built by the Egyptians in the 1830s stands at the entrance, though the harbor itself is pure Venetian engineering. At sunset, the waterfront glows amber and rose. Narrow streets wind through the old town, stone arsenals where galleys were once built and repaired, mansions with wooden balconies and iron railings, tiny squares where bougainvillea spills purple over ancient walls. The old Jewish quarter still carries its name, though the community was deported during the German occupation and largely perished. The Ottomans added their own layers. The Mosque of the Janissaries watches over the harbor, its dome now housing exhibitions rather than prayers. Turkish baths and hammams hide in back streets, some converted into restaurants, others slowly crumbling back to earth. Chania served as Crete's capital until 1971. That history shows in its grandeur. Consulates and administrative buildings line broader avenues. The municipal market, shaped like a cross, has operated since 1913. An hour east along the coast, Rethymno offers something different, smaller, quieter, more intimate. The Venetian fortress of Fortezza dominates the town from its headland, the largest castle the Venetians ever built on Crete. Inside its walls, a mosque stands where a cathedral once rose. The layers never stop accumulating. Below the fortress, Rethymno's old town is a maze of Venetian doorways, Ottoman wooden balconies, and tiny shops selling leather goods the way their owners' great-grandfathers did. The small harbor holds a fraction of Chania's boat traffic. Locals outnumber tourists in the cafeteria. Children still play in the squares after dark. Both towns preserve something increasingly rare, authenticity that hasn't been polished into performance. The Venetian Republic ruled Crete for over 4 centuries, and nowhere did they build more beautifully than along the northern coast, in two harbor towns that seem to have stopped their clocks around 1600. Chania and Rethymno face the gentle northern sea, but drive 30 minutes inland and the roads begin to climb toward villages that empires could never reach, where resistance became a way of life. From the northern coast, Crete looks like a gentle island, resort towns, sandy beaches, harbor cafes serving cold drinks to sunburned tourists. Turn south, and everything changes. White Mountains rise in western Crete, their peaks snow-capped 8 months of the year. Over 50 summits exceed 2,000 meters. The highest, Parthenon, reaches 2,454 meters. There are no roads across this massif, only ancient footpaths and shepherds who know every stone by name. In central Crete, Mount Ida dominates the horizon. The Greeks called it the sacred mountain, home of Zeus himself. Its summit, Timios Stavros, stands at 2,456 meters, the highest point on the island. Pilgrims still climb to the chapel at its peak each August. Between these ranges, cut off from easy access, villages developed a culture of fierce independence that no occupier ever broke. Anaugea clings to the slopes of Mount Ida, rebuilt twice after being completely destroyed, once by the Ottomans in 1822, again by the Germans in 1944, who executed every male over 15 in retaliation for resistance activities. They burned every building. The village rose again. Today, Anaugea is famous for its musicians, its textiles, and its absolute refusal to be anything other than Cretan. The Amari Valley hides between mountain walls, its villages connected by roads that barely fit a single car. Byzantine churches scatter across the landscape, some containing frescoes 1,000 years old. Farmers here still harvest by hand. Wedding celebrations last 3 days. Strangers receive invitations. In the far west, the Sfakia region produced some of Crete's most legendary resistance fighters. During World War II, Sfakian villagers helped evacuate over 10,000 Allied soldiers from beaches the Germans couldn't reach. The mountains protected what empires couldn't conquer. This is where Cretan identity was forged. In isolation, in resistance, in traditions passed down through generations who never left their valleys. These peaks guard villages that time forgot, but they also hide a gorge so deep and so long that walking its floor takes an entire day, where walls rise half a kilometer and the sky becomes a distant ribbon of blue. At 4 in the morning, buses begin climbing from the northern coast into the White Mountains. Their headlights cut through darkness on roads with no guardrails. Their destination is a small plateau called Sila Scalo, the wooden staircase. Here at 1,230 meters above sea level begins one of the longest gorges in Europe. Samaria. For 16 kilometers, the gorge descends through a crack in the earth that took millions of years to form. Sheer walls rise 500 meters on either side. In places, the path narrows to barely 4 meters across. The Greeks call this section the Iron Gates, and when you stand between those walls, you understand why. The sky becomes a ribbon of blue far above. The descent takes 5 to 7 hours. There is no other way out except forward. No vehicle access, no shortcuts, no helicopter rescues for tired legs. Just the ancient riverbed, the cypress trees clinging to impossible slopes, and the steady rhythm of your own footsteps on stone. The Samaria Gorge became a national park in 1962, partly to protect the landscape, partly to save the Cretan wild goat. The Crete, as locals call it, nearly went extinct from hunting. Now several hundred roam the gorge and surrounding peaks, their curved horns silhouetted against the morning sky. If you're quiet and lucky, you'll spot them watching from the high ledges. The abandoned village of Samaria sits roughly halfway through the trek. Stone houses empty since 1962, when the last residents relocated. A Byzantine church still stands, its door open to hikers resting in the shade. Wild herbs grow where gardens once fed families. At the gorge's end, the Libyan Sea appears. The village of Agaya Rumeli waits with cold drinks and ferries to Sfakia. There's no road out. The mountains simply don't allow it. Completing Samaria feels like an accomplishment, because it is one. The gorge doesn't accommodate weakness. Samaria carves through the mountains toward the sea, but other caverns in these peaks descend into the earth itself, into darkness where the king of the gods drew his first breath 4,000 years before the first philosopher asked why. Greek mythology tells that Zeus, father of gods and men, was not born on Mount Olympus. He was born on Crete, in darkness, in hiding, in a cave. His father Cronus ruled the Titans, and prophecy warned that his own child would overthrow him. So Cronus swallowed each newborn whole. 5 children disappeared into his stomach. 5 gods consumed by their father's fear. When Zeus was born, his mother Rhea hid him in a cave on Crete. She gave Cronos a stone wrapped in blankets. He swallowed it, thinking his 6th child was gone, but Zeus survived, grew, and eventually fulfilled the prophecy, freeing his siblings and claiming the throne of Olympus. Two caves claim this story: the Dikteon cave on the Lasithi plateau, the Ideon cave high on Mount Ida. Ancient Cretans worshipped at both sites, leaving offerings that archaeologists have recovered by the thousands. The Dikteon cave is easier to reach. From the village of Sycro, a path climbs through olive groves before descending into the mountain. Stalactites and stalagmites, shaped over millennia, fill the chambers. An underground lake fills the lowest level, black water that never sees sunlight. Bronze shields, jewelry, and ceramic figures were found here, offerings to the infant god spanning centuries. The Ideon cave sits at 1,500 meters on Ida's slopes. Fewer tourists make this pilgrimage. The cave itself is less dramatic visually, but the offerings recovered here suggest even greater religious importance. Bronze drums, gold jewelry, artifacts spanning over 2,000 years of continuous worship. Some scholars believe this was the supreme sanctuary of Minoan religion. The ancient Cretans didn't distinguish between myth and landscape the way modern minds do. These were literal sacred spaces. The mountain was the god's body, the cave was his first home. Entering meant approaching divine presence. Walking into these dark chambers, it's not hard to feel why. The temperature drops, sound disappears, the world above stops mattering. The mountains shelter the birthplace of gods, but the southern coast below them holds landscapes that seem almost otherworldly, where hippies once slept in Roman tombs and palm forests spill onto beaches facing Africa. The Libyan Sea meets Crete's southern coast in a collision of rock and blue. This shore faces Africa, not Europe. Egypt lies closer than Athens. The light is different here, harsher, cleaner. The tourism infrastructure thins, and something older emerges. Matala's sandstone cliffs contain caves that humans have used for thousands of years. Romans carved them into tombs. Early Christians expanded them into dwellings. In the 1960s and 70s, hippies from across Europe and America made Matala a legendary gathering place. Joni Mitchell wrote a song called Carey here, about a man she loved one summer. Cat Stevens played guitar in the caves. Draft dodgers and dreamers lived without electricity or running water, creating a community that became mythologized across a generation. The caves are fenced now, a protected archaeological site you can visit during daylight hours, but the beach remains, curved beneath those honeycomb cliffs, the water clear enough to read a book through. East along the coast, Preveli Beach defies expectations entirely. A river flows through a gorge lined with palm trees, Europe's largest natural palm forest, before emptying into a small bay. The combination of river, palms, and sea feels tropical, displaced, impossible on a Greek island. Yet here it is. The palms are native. They've grown here for millennia. Above the beach, Preveli Monastery has stood since the late 1500s. During World War II, the monks helped hide and evacuate Allied soldiers to Egypt by submarine. The Germans burned the monastery in retaliation. It was rebuilt and still operates today. The abbot still offers blessings to visitors who ask the favor. Further east, the fortress of Frango Castello rises from a coastal plain. The Venetians built it in 1374 to control a rebellious region. It never really worked. Suffekians resented the structure and what it represented. Legends claim that each May, ghostly armies appear at dawn near the fortress walls, shadows of soldiers killed in an 1828 battle against the Ottomans. Locals call them the Droselites. Frango Castello faces the Libyan Sea and its ghosts, but the far western corner of Crete holds something that needs no legend to feel unreal, where beaches turn pink and lagoons glow in colors that cameras struggle to capture. At the southwestern tip of Crete, the island dissolves into the sea. Elafonisi isn't technically a beach. It's a peninsula connected to Crete by water so shallow you can wade across at knee height. On calm days, the sandbars create natural pools in a dozen shades of blue. The sand itself carries a pink tint, colored by millions of crushed shells from tiny organisms called foraminifera. There is nowhere else like this in Europe. The lagoon faces west toward open ocean. Nothing between here and Libya except 300 kilometers of water. At sunset, the colors shift through impossible combinations, rose and gold and turquoise bleeding into each other, while the horizon swallows the sun. Elafonisi sits within a protected nature reserve. The area shelters over 100 plant species, some found nowhere else on Earth. Sea daffodils bloom in autumn. Sea turtles nest on quieter sections between April and August. Conservationists work constantly to balance access with preservation, because over 1 million visitors now come each year. The road to reach Elafonisi twists through mountain villages and gorge passages where the asphalt narrows to single lanes. The journey takes over an hour from Chania. Though it feels longer, this remoteness is part of the magic. You earn the beauty. At the opposite corner of western Crete, Balos offers a different spectacle. The lagoon sits where the Gramvusa Peninsula meets the main island, a shallow bay protected by a sand barrier, the water graduating from white to turquoise to deep blue as the bottom drops away. The Venetian fortress of Gramvusa watches from its island perch offshore, once a notorious pirate haven that terrorized Ottoman shipping. Most visitors reach Balos by boat from Knossos. The alternative is a dirt road followed by a steep descent down an unpaved path that takes 30 minutes to negotiate. Either way, the first glimpse of that lagoon silences people. Cameras rise. Conversations stop. The colors seem computer-generated. They are not. These western shores represent Crete at its most visually transcendent, but the island saves one of its most powerful stories for a tiny island in the east, where Europe sent its sick to be forgotten, and where the forgotten built a community that refused to disappear. In the Gulf of Ilunda, a small island rises from waters so clear you can count the stones on the bottom 10 meters down. Spinalonga. The Venetians fortified this island in 1579, part of their defense network against Ottoman invasion. The fortress proved so effective that Spinalonga remained Venetian until 1715, over 40 years after the rest of Crete had fallen. The Ottomans simply couldn't take it. The Ottomans held it next, settling a small community within the walls. Then came the Greeks after the 1898 independence. And then came the decision that would define the island forever. In 1903, Spinalonga became a leper colony. Patients from across Greece were sent here, isolated, removed from society, forgotten by a world that feared their disease and the disfigurement it caused. At its peak, over 400 people lived on this tiny island, building a community from abandonment. The lepers created their own society. They married each other, opened shops along the main street, published a newspaper, elected leaders, demanded better treatment from the government, and eventually received electricity, running water, and proper medical facilities. They formed a community that refused to surrender dignity despite their exile, despite the knowledge that most would never leave. The colony operated until 1957, making it one of the last active leper colonies in Europe. The final residents were relocated as antibiotics made the disease curable. Some had lived on Spinalonga for decades. Some had been born there. Today, visitors walk the same streets those patients walked. The hospital stands empty, its windows open to the wind. Houses crumble slowly, their roofs collapsed, fig trees growing through stone floors. The disinfection chamber, where new arrivals were processed, still stands near the entrance tunnel. Spinalonga became internationally famous through Victoria Hislop's novel The Island, which brought millions of readers to this story. But the real history needs no fiction to move you. Some places hold memory in their stones. Spinalonga remembers those who were sent here to be forgotten. But across Crete, in villages and towns and cities, another kind of survival continues, where traditions passed down through centuries explain why this island's people live longer and celebrate harder than almost anywhere in Europe. Cretans have one of the highest life expectancies in the world. Scientists have studied the island for decades, trying to understand why. The answers reveal something about how humans were meant to live. Part of the explanation is diet. The Cretan version of Mediterranean eating emphasizes wild greens, olive oil, legumes, and moderate amounts of wine. Meat appears sparingly, sugar rarely. Researchers first identified this pattern in the 1950s through the 7 countries study, which tracked heart disease across cultures. Cretans had the lowest rates. The findings launched global interest in Mediterranean nutrition that continues today. But diet alone doesn't explain Cretan longevity. The island maintains social structures that modern life has eroded elsewhere. Extended families live near each other, often in the same village for generations. Elderly relatives rarely face isolation. Grandparents help raise children. Children grow up knowing great-grandparents. The bonds create safety nets that no government program can replicate. The music matters too. Cretan music centers on the lyra, a 3-stringed bowed instrument that sounds nothing like its ancient namesake. Players learn from masters in unbroken lines of transmission stretching back centuries. The repertoire includes mantinades, improvised rhyming couplets sung in Cretan dialect, often composed spontaneously to mark occasions or tease friends. At festivals called panegyria, dancing continues until dawn, not performance dancing. Participatory dancing in lines and circles, young and old together, the steps unchanged since Ottoman times and probably long before. Grandmothers dance beside teenagers. No one sits out. Raki flows at these gatherings. The Cretan grape spirit accompanies every social occasion, offered as welcome, shared as friendship, poured at celebrations and funerals alike, always with small plates of food because Cretans never drink on empty stomachs. The combination adds up to something researchers call social coherence. a sense of belonging, of purpose, of being seen by your community and knowing you matter. Modern Crete isn't frozen in tradition. Heraklion has nightclubs, Chania has boutique hotels, young people leave for Athens and sometimes don't return. The pressures of contemporary life erode old patterns here as everywhere. But the core persists, the values transmitted across generations who survived every occupation and emerged still Cretan, still dancing, still pouring raki for strangers, still living as if community matters more than convenience. This spirit is the island's true treasure, not the beaches or the ruins or the mountains, but the people who chose to stay and maintain what their ancestors built. Dawn over the Aegean. The first light touches the white mountains, turning snow peaks gold, then spreads across the northern coast, waking harbor towns that have greeted mornings like this for centuries. Crete holds 4,000 years of continuous human presence. Civilizations have risen on this island, flourished, and vanished into archaeology. Empires have claimed it, exploited it, and eventually left. The Minoans built their labyrinth and disappeared into mystery. The Mycenaeans came and fell. The Romans made Crete a province. The Byzantines built churches that still stand. The Venetians raised fortresses and harbors so beautiful that we use them today. The Ottomans imposed their minarets and were driven out after 2 centuries of resistance. The Germans thought they had conquered the island in 1941 and spent 4 years learning otherwise. Through all of it, something persisted, a stubbornness woven into the landscape itself. Mountains too steep to tame, gorges too deep to cross easily. A coastline that hides as much as it reveals, a people who chose resistance when surrender would have been easier, who rebuilt burned villages and buried their dead and kept dancing. Today that resistance takes quieter forms. A grandmother still baking bread in a wood-fired oven which her grandmother used. A shepherd walking paths his great-grandfather walked, knowing the same stones. A musician playing the lyra the way his teacher taught him, and his teacher's teacher before that. The melody unchanged across lifetimes. The beaches will always draw visitors. The palaces will always fascinate archaeologists. The harbors will always photograph beautifully against the sunset. But Crete's real gift isn't found in any guidebook. It's the understanding that some places hold more than scenery. They hold accumulated human experience, joy and loss, conquest and liberation, the weight of myth and the lightness of a village feast where strangers become family by morning. The Aegean wind carries thyme and salt, and something older. Stand on a southern cliff at evening and watch the sea turn gold beneath you. This island began Western civilization once. It continues, unhurried, into its 5th millennium.